the strategic approach that we intend to adopt with China. We have to be clear-headed about the nature of the threat that we face, but of course we also have to look for areas where we can cooperate as well.
Suella Braverman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year as Home Secretary I made the decision to exclude Yang Zhenbo from the UK because his presence posed a threat to our national security. That decision was based on the advice of MI5, and I'm very pleased that the High Court has upheld that decision. I say this gently to the Minister, but isn't it regrettable that it's taken a high-profile case, public outcry and opposition MPs dragging the Minister to the Chamber to finally get the government to commit to implementing the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme, a scheme that we enacted and that was ready to go at the time of the general election. Given the unprecedented threat posed by China, malicious cyber attacks, transnational repression, the Confucius Institutes, Chinese police stations, and of course the human rights abuses of the Uyghur Muslims. If the government's really serious about tackling the Chinese threat, when will it list China on the enhanced tier?
Minister.
Well, I wasn't going to make this point, but given the Right Honourable Lady has made her point in the way that she has, I will just gently point out that the previous government had a significant period of time from the passing of the national security. The Right Honourable Lady shakes her head. It is a statement of fact to say that the previous government had a significant amount of time, many months, from the passing of the National Security Act, where they could have chosen to implement the first scheme. They didn't implement the first scheme. It now falls to this government to do so, and that is precisely what we will do.
Don Aldridge.
Mr. Speaker, it's disappointing that some members opposite are trying to turn what should be a moment of collective unity in the face of a shared security threat into a political row instead. Does the Security Minister agree with me? It is pretty incredible for the party whose Defence Secretary was sacked for leaking vital intelligence information about the Huawei 5G contract to now pose as the protector of our country's national security.
Well, I'm grateful to him, and I agree. The approach of this government will always be to work constructively across the House on matters relating to national security. But given the record of certain Right Honourable and Honourable members opposite, I suggest perhaps humility might be the order of the day for some of them.
John Tugendar.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. Look, I don't want to go over this readiness of the first scheme again and again. I just leave it that I was assured by the same officials who sit in the box advising him that it was ready to go by the end of the year. Clearly the advice has changed. There's only one thing in the department that's changed, and that's the party leading it. So I can only assume that there's a change of intent. But I'm delighted that it will be ready to go by the summer, better late than never. The real question, of course, is whether it will be worth having. And the advice from MI5 was very, very clear. If China isn't in the enhanced tier, it's not worth having. Will China be in that tier?
Thank you. Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman. He knows that I take these matters incredibly seriously. He and I have known each other for a very long time, and therefore I know that he will take on trust my assertion to him and to the House that the scheme wasn't ready to go when we arrived in government in July of this year. We are working at pace. I've given a time frame for the House today, and I've also said that we're looking very carefully, very closely, working with colleagues across government to look at how we can best structure the scheme. And we will make the announcements in the normal way in due course.
Joel Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One weak point in protecting our parliamentary democracy from hostile state actors is money in politics. Does the Security Minister agree with me that this latest case shows it's a priority to ensure our electoral laws are robust enough to ensure that only funds that are clean and sourced entirely from within the UK fund our political parties, because there seems to be some confusion, certainly from some of the parties opposite?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Honourable Gentleman makes a very important point, and I know that he speaks with great authority on this matter. He will know very well that we've just appointed Baroness Hodge as the government's new anti-corruption champion, and she will be supporting the work that we do, looking very carefully at the impact that money, dirty money, has on politics. And he's absolutely right. This government will want to assure itself that the electoral laws that govern the conduct of elections are robust and ensure that there are not opportunities for people from overseas who seek to intervene in our political processes. It is a matter and advice that I think should be taken very seriously by all parties across this House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my Wimbledon constituency, there are many Hong Kongers deeply concerned about surveillance from Chinese agents in this country. Is the Minister able to give my constituents any assurance that their legitimate fears are being addressed by this government?
I'm grateful to him for raising the plight of his constituents. Yes, I am able to give him those assurances. The government takes the kind of interventions that he's referred to very, very seriously. Through the Defending Democracy Task Force, we are looking very carefully at the issue of transnational repression, and we will have more to say about it in due course.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Minister about the integrity of our democracy? And in particular, can I ask what steps he's taking to ensure the integrity of the processes and institutions of our political process, especially, but not only, with regards to China?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very important point. I mentioned briefly earlier on the importance that this government attaches to the Defending Democracy Task Force. This was a body that we inherited from the previous government. We are working at pace to ensure that it works as effectively across government as it possibly can. And fundamentally, it seeks to address the point he has made about challenging those threats to the integrity of our democracy. This government will ensure that no stone is left unturned in seeking to address these very significant challenges that we all know that we face.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Mr. Speaker, just a few days ago, the head of MI5 talked about having to make uncomfortable choices, and he talked about paring back counter-terrorism operations in order to deal with the huge rise in state threats. Now, if the government means what it says about security being the first priority of the government, will he undertake to make sure MI5 and the security services as a whole have the resources they need to tackle all the threats? And by all means, blame the previous government for the state we're in, but it won't get him very far because I need him to answer that question.
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a fair point and a good challenge. And I can give him an assurance that the Home Secretary and I work incredibly closely with MI5 and with colleagues across government to make sure that they have the resources they need to do the very difficult job that they do. I mentioned the remarks that Ken McCallum had made in his annual threat lecture back in October. The nature of the threat that we face is more challenging, more complex than at any point during our lifetimes. That does require resource and it requires an expertise. And the Home Secretary, myself as Security Minister, and all of the government will work to make sure that our security services have the resources they need to do the job.
Boris Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful for this urgent question, and I thank the Minister for what he said, in particular about the Defending Democracy Task Force. But I wonder if the Minister can assure me as well that not only will the government do all it can to secure our national security, but that with respect to the activities of individuals with known links to the Chinese government and who are considered to be a national security risk, that the fullest of investigations will be done in order to ensure the integrity of our national security.
Mr. Speaker, I can give the honourable member that assurance.
Chris Law.
Mr. Speaker, the United Front Work Department has said there are 40,000 members globally, and Mr Jan Tembo is surely the tip of the iceberg in the UK. They're not only tasked with cultivating relationships with high-level figures that extend an influence of British nationals, but in all walks of society. That means the public need to be much more aware of the risk to themselves. So I wanted to ask very specifically, what is the Minister doing to assess the numbers of members in our society, and what public awareness campaign are you going to make for my constituents of Dundee and also across these islands?
Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable member makes an important point about public awareness, and I will take that away and give it further consideration. But with regard to the remarks that he made at the beginning, I think what he has done essentially is underline the importance of why we do need the first scheme. As I've said a number of times before, the government are committed to implementing the scheme. We're getting on and we will implement it in the new year.
John Slinger.
Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the somewhat chiding tone of some of the comments from honourable members opposite, does the Security Minister agree with me that it is actually possible to both maintain a